The motor died at the worst possible stretch, where the Cahaba narrows between two gravel bars and the current runs fast and shallow over rock you cannot see in the dark. Wade had the kill switch in his hand. Before he understood, he had reached for it, and then he understood he had not touched it at all. The motor had simply quit. The boat slewed sideways in the push of the water, and he put the paddle down hard on the right side to bring the bow back around, and in the half-second the hull went quiet. He heard the thing on the bank match its pace to his. He did not look at it yet. He looked at the water, because the water would kill him faster than anything standing on dry ground, and a man who has run a river at night for 11 seasons knows which threat to answer first. He found the channel by the sound of it, the deeper note where the current ran clean, and he steered the dead boat into it with the paddle and let the river carry them. Behind him his nephew said his name once. "Lo, the way you say, a word when you are trying not to make it real." Wade Tarrant had guided fishing trips on the lower stretches of that river since he was 24, and he was 35 now. And in all that time he had never once put a client in the water or lost a boat or called for help he could not justify later. He did not exaggerate. It was a point of pride with him that bordered on a flaw. When a sport hooked into a rod eye base that ran maybe 2 pounds, Wade would call it 2 pounds, not 3. And he had lost tips over it and did not care. The river did not reward men who told themselves stories. The river was indifferent to your story. It rose when it rose, and it pulled what it pulled, and the only insurance against it was paying close, exact attention, and never once pretending a thing was other than it was. He knew the lower Cahaba the way a man knows the inside of his own mouth with his tongue. He knew where the limestone shelved out under the surface and would take the skeg off a careless motor. He knew the slow green eddy below the old shoal where the big fish held in August, and the snag at the second bend that moved a little every spring flood and had to be relearned every year. He kept a waterproof notebook in the dry box, with depths and hazards penciled in his own small hand, dates beside them, because the river changed, and a guide who trusted last year's map drowned somebody. The notebook was 3 years old and swollen at the spine from getting wet and drying out 100 times. And the pages near the front had gone soft as cloth, and he could find any entry in it by feel. He checked his fuel before every trip and after, and he wrote the level down. He checked the bilge. He checked the weather twice and the gauge upstream once. The online reading off his phone before he lost the signal at the put-in. And he carried a paper chart of the lower river folded in a freezer bag, even though he had not needed to look at it in 6 years, because the day you needed it was the day you had not brought it. He ran a clean boat. The dry box held what it always held, in the order it always held it, so that his hand could find a thing in the dark without his eyes. The radio on the left, the first aid kit under it, the rifle broken down in its sleeve along the bottom, the flare, and the spare headlamp, and the tape and the notebook stacked on the right. He did not run the Narrows after dark unless he had to, and tonight he had to, because the trip had run long and the alternative was a cold night on a gravel bar, with a 14-year-old and a storm coming in from the southwest. He had weighed it, the way he weighed everything, the cold and the boy against the Narrows and the dark, and he had chosen the Narrows, and he would have chosen the Narrows again with everything he learned that night, because the choice had been right with the information a reasonable man could have had. The 14-year-old was his sister's boy, Eli, down for 2 weeks while his mother worked a double rotation at the plant in Birmingham. Eli was a quiet kid, more comfortable with a phone than a paddle when he arrived. Thumbs going on a screen that got no bars past the first bend. And over the first week Wade had watched the river do its slow work on him. He watched the boy stop reaching for the dead phone in his pocket and start watching the water instead. the way the current folded over a sunk log, the dimples where fish worked the surface at evening. The boy had caught his first decent fish 3 days ago, a long-ear sunfish no bigger than a man's palm, the gill flap inked that deep electric blue they get, and had held it cupped in both hands with an expression Wade had not seen on him before. And Wade had shown him how to wet his hand first so he would not strip the slime, and how to hold the fish over the water when he let it go, so that if it kicked free it fell home and not into the boat. The boy had done it exactly right, slow and careful, and watched it flick down into the green and gone. Wade had thought without saying it that this was the thing he could give the kid that nobody else would. His sister gave him a roof and food and a school. Wade could give him a river and a way of paying attention that the boy did not get anywhere else, and the boy had taken it faster than Wade expected, the way kids take a thing when nobody is grading them on it. They had put in that morning above the falls and worked downstream all day, and the fishing had been good and slow and warm, the boy hooking up often enough to stay hungry for the next one. And Wade had let the day run because the boy was happy. He had cut the motor in the long pools and let them drift, and pointed out the things you only see when you stop. The water snake threading the shallows, the kingfisher working its beat up and down the same 50 yards of bank, the slow brown bass holding in the seam below. That was the mistake, if it was a mistake. He turned it over later many times and could not make it into a mistake. A man takes his nephew fishing and lets the good day be long. There was no version of that decision that a reasonable person would call reckless. He had checked the sky at 4 and the clouds were stacking in the west, but slow. And the radio in the dry box gave him a window, and the window was real. The window was not the thing that went wrong. What went wrong started small, the way the worst things on a river always did, with an absence rather than a presence. They were a half-mile above the Narrows, drifting the last of the light, when Wade noticed that the frogs had stopped, the lower Cahaba in late summer is loud at dusk. The bullfrogs come up along the muddy slacks and the bank cuts, and they make a wall of sound you stop hearing after the first hour. The way you stop hearing a refrigerator, Wade did not consciously listen for them. He had simply heard them his whole life on that water. And when they were gone, the silence reached him the way a missing stare reaches a man in the dark. He put the paddle across his knees and he listened. Nothing. Not the frogs, not the night birds that should have been starting, not the small constant business of a living riverbank at dusk. The water moved and the boat moved, and that was all the sound there was. "Why'd you stop?" Eli said. "Listening," Wade said. To what? Wade did not answer that because the honest answer was that he was listening to nothing, and the nothing was the problem, and he did not have language for it yet that would not frighten the boy. He dipped the paddle and they went on. He told himself the frogs went quiet sometimes, a heron working the bank would shut them up for a stretch, an otter, a gator, though they were rare this far up, and he had not seen one in 2 seasons. He built the explanation carefully, the way he always did, laying the rational planks down one at a time. And even as he laid them, he felt the structure not hold. A heron quiets one bank for 50 yards. This was both banks, and it was complete, and it ran ahead of them downstream as far as the failing light would let him see, which meant whatever had silenced the river was not in one place. It was moving. It was moving the way they were moving. He started the motor then earlier than he had meant to, because he wanted to be through the Narrows and down to the takeout before full dark, and the little outboard caught on the second pole and settled into its idle. And he brought the bow around and ran. For a while the noise of the motor covered the silence, and he was grateful for it. boy trailed his hand in the water, and Wade told him to bring it in. Not sharply, just bring it in. The bank slid by on both sides, black tangles of river birch and privet, and the pale trunks of sycamores leaning out over the cuts. The clouds had eaten the last of the sunset. The first real dark came down. They were maybe 300 yards above the head of the Narrows when Wade smelled it. The smell came across the water from the right bank on a slack in the breeze, and it was not a river smell. The river smelled like the river always smelled, like wet stone and green rot and the cold mineral breath of deep water. And Wade knew that smell better than he knew his wife's perfume. This rode on top of it. It was a rank, heavy musk, thick the way a wet dog is thick but wrong, with something under it, like meat that had turned, and it was strong enough that the boy made a small, disgusted sound, and said, "What is that?" And Wade said, "Dead fish," knowing it was not dead fish, hearing the lie. The boy did not believe him either. They both heard it land. A dead fish on a gravel bar smelled like one dead fish. This was a smell with a body behind it, a big body, clothes, and the breeze that carried it had come off the right bank where the trees came down to the water in a black wall. And Wade looked at that wall for the first time and could not see anything in it. And that was almost worse. He opened the throttle. The boat lifted its bow and ran, and the Narrows came up fast in the headlamp beam he clicked on with his thumb, the white water breaking pale over the gravel bars, and he read the channel the way he had read it 10,000 times, and put the boat into it. And the motor died. It did not sputter. It did not cough or starve or do any of the things a motor does when it is going to quit and gives you warning. It simply stopped between one beat and the next, the way a thing stops when a switch is thrown, and the sudden silence was so total that for a moment Wade heard his own pulse in his ears. He had the kill switch in his hand, and the kill switch was off. The fuel was good. He had checked it. The line was clear. He pulled the cord and got nothing, not a catch, not a cough, the engine dead the way a stone is dead. And there was no time to understand it because the boat was loose in the current at the head of the Narrows in the dark, and that would kill them both inside a minute if he did not deal with it. So, he dealt with it. He put the paddle down, and he steered. He found the channel by feel and by the sound of the deep water, and he kept the bow straight and let the river do what the motor could not, carry them through. And in the quiet of the dead boat with the paddle dipping, he heard the thing on the right bank pacing them. That was when he let himself know it. Not a deer. A deer crashes, or it freezes. This moved at the speed of the boat, steady, deliberate, through brush that should have slowed any animal its size, and he could hear that it was large by the way the brush gave around it, the low, heavy sound of growth being pushed aside rather than broken. It did not hurry. It did not fall behind. It held even with the stern, 10 yards back in the black trees, matching the river's own pace, and the river was carrying them at the speed of a man jogging, and the thing in the trees kept up without effort. The boy's voice was very small. "There's something on the bank. I know it. Keep still. Watch the front of the boat and tell me if you see white water." He gave the boy a job because a job is the only thing that holds a frightened person together, and because he needed the boy's eyes forward while his own went to the bank. He could not see it. The headlamp threw a cone of white out over the water and turned the trees beyond into a flat black wall. And somewhere in that wall the thing moved, and the moving was all he had of it. He thought the way you think when you were trying to climb back down to solid ground, that it was a bear. A black bear could run a bank. There were bears in the county. Not many. But they were there. He held the thought up against the evidence the way he always did. A bear on a riverbank at night, pacing a boat in silence, after the frogs went quiet for a mile, putting out a musk that turned the boy's stomach at 30 yards. The thought did not hold, he let it go. He had a rule. He had never once spoken aloud. Which was that pattern kept you alive. And the pattern here was not a bear's pattern. A bear blundered onto you and either ran or did not. This was not blundering. This was escort. They came through the narrows clean. He felt the water flatten and slow below the second bar, and he let out a breath he had not known he was holding, and he reached back and pulled the cord again, hoping, and got nothing. The motor was a dead weight on the transom. He laid the cord down and took up the paddle and kept them in the channel, and the thing on the bank kept even with the stern. And the river ran on toward the takeout that was still better than a mile downstream. He did the arithmetic without meaning to, the way he did all river arithmetic, by feel and by landmark. The takeout was below the iron bridge, and the iron bridge was past the long, straight reach where the river ran slow and wide between high banks. And that reach was the better part of a mile, and at the speed the current ran, he would be the better part of a half hour getting down it with a paddle. A half hour, and the thing on the bank would pace him the whole way if it kept on as it had, and he had no reason to think it would not. He thought about going to the far bank. The thing was on the right. If he crossed to the left and hugged it, he would put the whole width of the river between them, 60 yards of open water. And that was something. He started to swing the bow, and then he stopped, because crossing meant turning broadside to the current in the dark with no motor, and because he did not know that the left bank was empty. He had heard one thing on the right. He had not heard the left go quiet, because the whole river had gone quiet. There could be nothing on the left bank, or there could be a second thing on the left bank, and he had no way to know which. And a man does not paddle his nephew toward a darkness. He cannot read on the theory that it is probably empty. He held the center. The center was the only ground he could be sure of. He kept the boat in the deep channel where the water ran cleanest and the banks were farthest on both sides, and he paddled, and he watched the right. The boy was crying without sound. Wade could hear it in his breathing, the small catches, and he did not tell him to stop because there was no shame in it, and telling him to stop would only tell him how afraid Wade was. Instead, he talked. He kept his voice low and even, and he talked about nothing, about the takeout, about how the truck was parked under the bridge, and how they would load up and get cheeseburgers at the place by the highway that stayed open late, and the talk was not for the information in it. The talk was a rope he was throwing the boy in the dark. He told him to keep watching the front. He told him they were doing fine. He believed about half of it. At the head of the long reach, the thing changed what it was doing, and the change was the worst thing yet, because it meant the thing was thinking. For the length of the narrows and the run below it, the thing had stayed even with the stern, behind them, following. Now it moved up. Wade heard the sound of it in the brush draw forward past the stern, up alongside the middle of the boat, and then up past the bow, until it was ahead of them, and then the sound stopped. It had gone still somewhere ahead on the right bank, and it was waiting, and the river was carrying the boat toward it at the pace of a slow walk, and there was not one thing Wade could do to stop the river from doing that. He stopped paddling. The boat drifted. He held the paddle ready as a brace, and he ran the white cone of the headlamp along the right bank ahead, slow, trying to find a place where the thing had stopped, and the light slid over black water and pale gravel, and the leaning trunks of sycamores, and found nothing. They were not where eyes should be. That was the first thing his mind gave him, before size, before color, the simple wrongness of the height. The eyes caught the headlamp and threw it back in a flat amber shine. 2 discs of cold gold, low and steady above the gravel. And they were as high off the ground as the eyes of a man standing higher, and they were too far apart. A dog's eyes at that distance would sit close, a hand's width. A deer's were set wide on the sides of the skull and through green and sat lower than a man's belt. These sat at the height of a tall man's face, and they were spaced wide as the span of 2 hands, and they did not move, did not blink, did not flick away from the light, the way every animal's eyes flick away. They held the light, and they held the boat in the light. And Wade understood with a cold that went all the way down that the eyes were not startled by the lamp. They were measuring it. He kept the light on them because he could not make himself take it off them. And in the spill of it, at the edge of the beam, he saw the shape that the eyes belonged to. Not all of it, never all of it, only a piece. He saw the line of a shoulder higher than the eyes themselves, which made no sense for any animal he knew, the shoulder rising above the head the way a man's shoulder does not, and the suggestion of a long arm or a foreleg, he could not tell which. The fur was dark and matted, and wet to the chest, from where it had come down to the water's edge. He saw that much, and the boat drifted closer, and his whole body told him not to let it drift closer. And he put the paddle down and backstroked hard and held the boat against the current, 50 feet off. "Don't move," he said to the boy, very quietly. "Don't make any quick move. Just sit." The boy had gone rigid in the bow and made no sound at all now, which was somehow worse than the crying. Wade held the boat in place with small corrections of the paddle, his arms already burning, and he made himself think. Running the lamp off, it felt like turning his back. Keeping the lamp on it felt like a provocation he did not understand the rules of. He killed the light. The dark came down complete, and his heart slammed once. Hard, and in the new black he could see nothing at all. And that was the trade he had made, to be blind in order not to provoke, and he did not know if it was the right trade. He listened. For a long moment, there was only the water. Then the brush moved, again the heavy push of growth giving way, and it was moving downstream once more, pacing, no longer ahead and waiting, but alongside, and Wade let out his breath and dug the paddle in and ran. He ran the boat down the long reach in the dark, with the lamp off, steering by the feel of the current and the faint difference between the black of the water and the deeper black of the banks. And the thing kept pace on the right the whole way. It did not move ahead again. It did not fall back. It held even 10 or 15 yards into the trees and matched the boat stroke for stroke. And the awful thing was the steadiness of it, the way it never once stumbled or rushed or lost the pace, the way it seemed content to simply accompany them downstream for as long as the river took them. Wade had hunted his whole life. He had followed game and been followed by nothing, and he knew the difference now between being followed and being escorted. And this was the second thing. And the second thing meant the choice of when belonged to it and not to him. He talked to the boy the whole way down. He did not stop talking. He told him to keep low and keep still, and that they were almost there, and somewhere in the middle of it he stopped believing. They were almost there and kept saying it anyway. His arms had gone past, burning into a dull mechanical ache, and he paddled through it because there was nothing else to do. No motor, no help, no bank he could trust. Only the center channel and the boy, and the thing on the right, and the slow black mile unspooling under the hull. He thought about the rifle and the dry box broken down. 3 rounds, and he did not reach for it because reaching for it meant stopping the paddle, and stopping the paddle meant giving the river back the right to put them where it wanted. And because a thing that could kill a motor and pace a boat for a mile in silence was not a thing he believed 3 rounds would solve. The rifle was a comfort. He was too honest to take. Halfway down the reach, he made himself try the radio. He had a handheld in the dry box, line of sight to the ranger station 8 miles down, and on a good night it reached. He kept one hand on the paddle and dug the radio out with the other, his fingers finding it on the left side of the box where it always sat. And he keyed it low and gave his call and his position, the iron bridge, the long reach above it, and he asked for anyone on the channel. And the radio gave him back a wash of static, with a structure to it that was almost words. He keyed it twice more. He said his name, slow and clear, and the station's call after it, and he waited the 3 seconds you wait, and the same static answered, that patterned hiss that rose and fell like it was almost shaping itself into something. He had used that radio 100 nights. He had heard it dead, and he had heard it clear, and he had heard it ride the edge of range, where a voice came through in broken pieces, and he had never once heard it do this, hold a rhythm under the noise, swell and ease, in a cadence that had nothing of weather or distance in it. He keyed it a last time and said, if anyone copies. 2 souls on the river below the Narrows, motors dead, and the rhythm under the static seemed to pause when he spoke and resume when he stopped. And he told himself that was his own ears doing it, finding a pattern the way ears do. Nobody was coming. He had known nobody was coming from the moment the motor died, the way you know a thing in your body before you let your mind say it. But he had tried, because trying was what you did, and now he had tried. And he put the radio back in its place in the box and closed the lid and went back to the only thing that was real, which was the paddle, and the water, and the dark. The thing paced them past the old gauging station, a concrete ruin on the right bank that Wade knew by the change in the current where the river ran over the drowned footing of it, and it paced them past the slough where the water went still and black and the smell came strong again across the slack. That rank wet moss close. And the boy gagged once and pressed his sleeve over his face. It paced them down to where the banks began to lower and the trees thinned toward the bridge. And Wade let himself believe, for the first time in what felt like an hour, and was probably 20 minutes, that they were going to reach the takeout. The iron bridge came up ahead, as a deeper darkness against the dark, the trestle of it, and below it the gravel ramp where his truck sat, and he could see the pale shape of the truck, and he put everything left in his arms into the paddle. And the pacing stopped. Not gradually. The heavy sound in the brush on the right bank simply ceased between one stroke and the next, the way the motor had ceased, and the silence it left behind was the same total silence that had started the whole night a mile and more upstream. Wade kept paddling. He did not slow to wonder at it. He drove the boat the last 100 yards to the ramp and felt the hull take the gravel, and he was out of the boat into the shin-deep water before it had fully stopped, hauling the bow up, getting the boy out, getting him up the ramp toward the truck with a hand between his shoulder blades. And the whole time the back of his neck was open and waiting for the thing the silence meant, and the thing did not come. He got the boy into the cab and the doors locked and the engine started and the headlights on, and he sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel and his arms shaking too hard to drive. The headlights threw 2 long cones up the ramp and across the lower end of the long reach, across the water and the near bank, and there was nothing in them. The river ran on, flat and black and ordinary. The boy was breathing in long, ragged pulls beside him, and Wade reached over without looking and put his hand on the back of the boy's neck, the way you steady a thing that is coming apart, and held it there, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be true. He should have driven away. Later, he could not fully explain to himself why he did not, except that 11 seasons of paying exact attention to a river had made a habit in him that did not switch off because he was afraid, and the habit needed to see. He got out of the truck. He left the engine running and the boy locked inside, and he walked back down to the boat with the headlamp. And he did the thing he had done 1,000 times after a hard trip, which was to check the boat and the bank. Except this time his hands were shaking, and the bank was the bank the thing had paced. He ran the light along the right bank where it came down to the ramp. The tracks were in the soft mud above the waterline, and he crouched over them and held the lamp on them and made himself read them, the way he read everything, exactly, without adding to them. There were 4, where the thing had come down to the edge and stood, and they were deep, deep the way a heavy thing sinks soft mud, and the soft rim of each had not yet slumped, which meant fresh, which meant minutes. They were longer than his own boot, and broader, and they showed 5 points spread wide at the front, where the toes had pushed down and dug in, and behind the spread of the toes there was a long pad, and behind the pad set back the clear, deep punch of a heel that no animal he had ever tracked put to the ground that way. A dog walks on its toes. A bear puts down a flat hind foot but leaves a different shape, a rounder pad, the toe marks closer and capped with claw above each one in a tidy arc. This was neither. This stood on a long, flat foot, like a man's foot, built wrong, heel and pad and 5 spread toes tipped with the deep, narrow gouges of claws that a man's foot does not have, and it was pressed into the mud at the depth of something that weighed what 2 men weighed. At the truck, at where they had pulled out. He did not measure them. He had a tape in the dry box, and he thought about getting it and laying it across the print the way he would lay it across anything he wanted to remember true. And he did not get it, because measuring it meant kneeling there longer with his back to the river, and because some part of him that he trusted more than his curiosity had started, quietly and completely, to insist that he leave. He looked at the prints one more time so that he would have them exactly, and would never be able to tell himself he had imagined them or made them bigger in the retelling.